Hi everyone, my name is Michael. I'm a Senior Technical Product Manager in the Mobile and Embedded Devices Group at Microsoft. And today we're going to be taking a look at writing managed applications for CE6. Now, there are a number of moving parts here that we're going to cover as part of this discussion. The first thing we need to do, of course, is configure our CE6 operating system image so that we can then deploy from Visual Studio 2005 a managed application to that operating system image. So initially we're going to configure the OS. Once we've configured the OS, we'll add in a number of components that we need to that operating system image to support application development. And then I'll jump over to a pre-built and running operating system image so that we can then see the steps of getting that image ready to receive an application and then write an application to deploy to that operating system image. So up on screen right now, I've got Visual Studio 2005. As you're probably aware, the new release, CE6, is a plug-in to Visual Studio 2005. So I now have one tool that is used to configure, build, download, debug, and test my CE6 operating system, as well as writing, building, testing, and debugging the applications that run on top of that operating system as well. So let's get started. I'm going to select File, New, Project. And of course, this is the standard way that I would get into writing a desktop application, a server application, a Windows mobile application, or now with the CE6 plugin, a Platform Builder operating system image. So I'm going to select Platform Builder for CE6. I'm going to choose a new operating system design, and I'll name this operating system design OS Design 1. You'll notice the location for the operating system image is WinCE 600 OS Designs. This, of course, is different than Windows CE version 5, which had its subfolder as PB Workspaces. So just be aware, PB Workspaces on CE5 and OS Designs on CE6. So I'm going to click OK. This will start the operating system design wizard, which is very similar to the CE5 OS Design wizard. So if you've been through this on CE5, the good news is this is very similar. There is nothing new to learn here. I'm going to select Next, and you'll notice that I have a number of BSPs or board support packages that I could choose to target with this operating system image. In our case, we're going to be using the new ARM-based device emulator as the target for our operating system image, but just be aware that this is multi-select, so I could choose, let's say, the ARM-based Aruba board, or I could choose a CEPC x86 board. And inside of Platform Builder at build time or at deploy time, I can simply swap out which board that I want to target. Interestingly, you could consider CE to be hardware components, which is the BSP, and then hardware independent components, which is the operating system, the web server, the FTP server, the media player, the internet browser, and so on. So by choosing multiple BSPs, I choose to swap in or out the underlying hardware needed to support that particular board. But I don't need to change the operating system configuration that I'm building. So I'm just going to go with Device Emulator here. I select Next, and then I have a number of templates that I could choose from for the operating system design. In my case, I'm going to choose PDA device and select Next, and go with the mobile handheld configuration of the operating system. You'll notice there are a number of different operating system components that I can choose from. In this case, applications and media. So I've got the .NET Compact Framework version 2.0 as a component. I can either add or remove that component from the operating system configuration. I'm going to take this out for now, and then we'll see how we can add this in easily using the new catalog functionality within CE6. I don't need ActiveSync. I'm going to deploy over TCP/IP, so I'm just going to turn that off and select Next for networking and communications. I don't need IPv6, so I'll turn that off, select Next, and then hit Finish. So what's happening now is that Platform Builder will generate the operating system design and will flag any potential security issues that occur within that operating system configuration. You'll notice that I'm getting a security warning here for OBEX server. Anything that exposes interfaces off of my device, such as FTP or Bluetooth or OBEX or web server, will generate a security warning if I add that component to my operating system design. We can see on the security warning that I get information on OBEX security, as well as general information on enhancing the security of the device. So I can use these links to get into the CE6 product documentation to be more familiar about the issues concerned with this component, as well as just generally securing my Windows CE based device. I'm going to acknowledge this as a security warning. Notice that running through the operating system design wizard is not the end of the process. OBEX server has given me the security warning. So maybe I don't want to have OBEX server in my device. In fact, my device does not have Bluetooth, so I don't need OBEX in the operating system design. So what I'm going to do now is step over to the catalog, and I'm going to search for OBEX and hit return. And you can see here is Object Exchange Protocol. And here is OBEX server with the exclamation point next to it. And that exclamation point basically means I'll get a security warning if I add that component to my operating system design. So I'm just going to turn off OBEX server, and it's as easy as that. Just take the tick out of the box. When we were running through the operating system design wizard, we turned off support for .NET Compact Framework. And this was deliberate because I wanted to show you how easy it is to add Compact Framework support into the operating system design. Under Applications and Services Development, you can see the Compact Framework version 2.0 shown on the screen. If I expand this out, you'll notice there are two versions of the .NET Compact Framework shown in the catalog. .NET Compact Framework 2.0 for UI-based devices, as well as .NET Compact Framework 2.0 for headless devices as well. You'll notice that the .NET Compact Framework components are shown with a circle next to the component. This is like a radio button in an application. That means that I can only select one or other of these components, so I cannot have support for Compact Framework headless and Compact Framework UI-based devices in the same operating system image. I need to choose one or the other of these two components. So I'm going to select .NET Compact Framework version 2.0, and you notice that we get the tick in the box. So you'd think that would be it. And of course, if I was just integrating a managed application into the final operating system image, that would indeed be it. I would be able to build this operating system image and then run the Compact Framework application on top of the OS. But of course, we need to deploy our application from Visual Studio 2005. And Visual Studio 2005 will need to deploy some CAB files to our device in order to get this to work. So we need a component inside of the operating system image that is capable of cracking that CAB file and installing the contents onto our embedded system. So now let's go ahead and add some new components to our operating system design. I'm going to use the catalog search tool to search for WCE load and hit return. You notice it tells me no items were found, but gives me the ability to search from the top of the catalog again. I'll select yes, and then you see that it finds the CAB file installer and uninstaller. This is a component called sysgen_WCE load, and this is the component inside of CE that gives you the ability to install a CAB file. The next component I'm going to add is ipconfig. So I'm going to search for ipconfig, and this will add a number of networking utilities, including ipconfig, ping, and root. So I'm going to select that component, which will add those components to my operating system design. It can also be useful to add the HTTPD web server to your operating system. If you can ping the server, great. If you can browse to the server, that may also be useful as well. So I'm also going to search for HTTPD, which is the web server, and add that to my operating system design. You'll notice that generates the same security warning that we've seen by adding OBEX to the operating system design. I'm going to acknowledge that as a warning. And then finally, I have one additional component that I want to add to my operating system design. And this is a component that I've generated using CE FileWiz, which is known as a Conman component. This is under third-party components. And here's the component, Conman ARMv4i component. To deploy an application from Visual Studio 2005 to my CE6-based device, there are two utilities I need to run on top of my CE6-based device before I can connect from Visual Studio 2005. These are called Command Client 2 and CMAccept, and both of these executables ship with Visual Studio 2005. So this component that I've added to my operating system design is simply adding the two executables and the two dependent DLLs into the final operating system image to make it very easy for me to run Command Client 2 and CMAccept. Note that I would typically only include the Command Client and CMAccept applications into a debug build of the operating system image when I'm running through that cycle of building and testing and deploying applications. Typically for a retail device, you wouldn't include these applications in the final device. Okay, so that's it. We've configured an operating system image based on the PDA design. We've added in support for a number of components which include ipconfig, WCE load, our Conman component, and the HTTPD web server. At this point we're ready to build the operating system image, but the build process would typically take about 10 minutes to complete. So I'm not going to do that right now. Instead, I've got an RDP connection back to a server that is running a virtual PC environment that has a pre-built version of the same operating system configuration in it. So inside of virtual PC, we can see here is my emulator image. This is the ARM-based emulator, and we'll come back to this in just a few seconds. This is running at 320 by 240 screen resolution, and that will be interesting for us when we get to be at the point where we write our application. So I'm going to minimize that. The operating system is up and running. You noticed that earlier in this presentation, I mentioned that we wanted to get ipconfig into the operating system image. Now that's important because we need to know the IP address of the target that we're going to be deploying to. So inside of this running version of Platform Builder within Visual Studio 2005, I have the Windows CE command prompt open on the screen. Typically this isn't shown, but you can use Alt-1 on the keyboard to bring this up. There are a number of extremely useful commands that I can run here. If you just type question mark at this point and hit return, you'll get a listing of all the commands that are available to you within the command prompt. Now, what I want to run is S for start, ipconfig, followed by a /d. And /d means instead of ipconfig running locally on the target and outputting its device into a console window, I want to redirect the output from ipconfig to the debug window inside of Visual Studio 2005. So I'm going to S start ipconfig /d, output the output from ipconfig to the debug window. So ipconfig runs. You can see here in the debug output window is the IP address of the target device, which in this case is the emulator. So I'm just going to capture that, copy that to the clipboard, because we're going to need to now configure a second instance of Visual Studio 2005 to be able to deploy to our target device. So here's our second instance of Visual Studio 2005. Let's write our managed application and then configure Visual Studio to deploy that application to our target. So again, I'm going to select File, New, Project. Again, this is exactly the same process that I ran through to create my initial operating system configuration. But in this case, I'm going to expand C#, Smart Device, and Windows CE 5 application. Notice that this says Windows CE 5 inside of the Visual Studio UI. But this is a managed app, so I can deploy this to CE5 or CE6 in exactly the same way. I'm going to choose Device Application and go with the default application name, Device Application 1, and then click on OK. There are a couple of things that I want to do here. I just want to have the application launch. I want to maybe have a button on the application that shows a message box, just to prove that the application is running. I've already mentioned that the emulator is running at 320 by 240, so I'm going to adjust the parameters for the main form within the application to fit within that size. And of course, this is easy to do using the properties inside of Visual Studio 2005. Okay, so it looks like Visual Studio has finished generating that application, and it looks like the form size is quite large, potentially 640 by 480 or even 800 by 600. Notice also that our application comes with a main menu. We don't need this for the application, so I'm just going to delete that from our application UI. I'm now going to bring up the properties for the form and scroll down so that we can get the size of the screen. And you can see here that it's 640 by 480. So I'm just going to type in here 320 by 240 and hit return. The next thing that I want to do is go to the toolbox and add a button onto my form. So I'll just drag that across, drop the button onto the form, and then I can move this button and change some of the parameters of the button at the same time. So I'm going to size the button so that's suitable for the form, and maybe also change some of the properties for the button as well. So we can see that we've got the name of the button, button 1, that's fine. I also want to change the text of the button to say click me, and also change the text size for the button as well, so that it's more visible on the screen. So maybe make this 18 point. The final thing that I need to do is write some code behind the button so it displays our message box. So I double click on click me, and I now put in message box dot show, and I'm going to put in here the string cool tools. Because of course we're showing the combination of the CE6 development tools and Visual Studio 2005 for application development. So it really is cool tools. Okay, so that's the application written. The next thing that I want to do, of course, is configure Visual Studio 2005, the application development portion, to talk to my target device. So I'm going to select Tools, and then Options. And within Tools Options, I'm going to scroll down to Device Tools, Devices, and you'll see here is my Windows CE5 device. So I'm going to select Properties on that. TCP Connect is the default transport that we're going to be using. I click on Configure at this point, and I want to select use a specific IP address and paste in the IP address that we captured from Platform Builder. So there are a number of steps here. Build and boot the operating system, use ipconfig to get its IP address, and then use Tools, Options, and the configured device to input that IP address for the TCP transport that we're going to use to deploy the application. Okay, I'm going to click on OK. Click on OK on Device Properties. Click on OK for Options. But we're not done quite yet. What we now need to do is go back to Platform Builder and run these two utilities, Command Client 2 and then CMAccept, before we can deploy the application from Visual Studio. Note that we have a 3-minute timeout from launching Command Client and CMAccept to make our connection from the application development version of Visual Studio 2005. Okay, so inside of Platform Builder, I'm again going to use S for start. I'm going to type Command Client 2 and hit return. And we won't see any feedback at this point. I'm going to type S for start, CMAccept. Again, I'm going to hit return. So we've started Command Client 2 and CMAccept. I'm going to type GI for get information, proc about running processes, and hit return. And this will give me the list of running processes against this operating system image. And we can see process 10, Command Client 2. Process 11, CMAccept. So we can see that both of these applications are now running. Okay, so at this point we're ready to deploy our application from Visual Studio 2005. So the first thing that I'm going to do is jump back to our application development tool. I'm going to use Control-Shift-B to build that application, and then I'm going to use F5 to deploy that application to our target device. I press F5. This will bring up a list of targets that I can deploy to. Of course, we want to deploy to Windows CE5 device, and then select Deploy. And what we'll now see at the bottom of the screen is that deployment will start. We'll deploy the .NET Compact Framework CAB file from Visual Studio 2005. Remember we had WCE load in our CE6 operating system image. So this CAB file that's being downloaded right now, once it's deployed to that CE6 operating system image, will be installed on that CE6 device using the WCE load component. Once this has been installed, potentially I think we get another 1 or 2 CAB files downloaded and installed, and then at that point we should see our application launch inside of the emulator. So I'll bring the emulator up onto the screen now, so that once deployment is complete, we should see the application appear inside of the emulator UI. So at this point it looks like the initial .NET Compact Framework CAB file is just about downloaded. One thing I should point out here about the operating system configuration that I'm using for this demonstration is that the operating system image that I generated for CE6 that is running inside of this emulation environment does not include the Compact Framework. For this demo, I only included the .NET Compact Framework 2.0 operating system dependency component, but not the Compact Framework itself. I wanted Visual Studio 2005 to deploy the Compact Framework and install the Compact Framework on the target that we're using here. So here we can see that the second CAB file was also downloaded, and at this point we should be ready to deploy the application into the emulator. So this will just take a few seconds to come up, and then of course we'll be able to click the button and see the message box appear inside of that application. Okay, so we can see the user interface inside of Visual Studio changing to show the debug environment. So at this point, if we had set breakpoints inside of the application, we would expect those breakpoints to be ready to fire depending on what we click inside of the application UI, inside of the Compact Framework application. So then when we have the application up inside of the emulator, we'll click the button, we'll get the message box, and then we'll be finished with the demonstration. Okay, so here comes the application. What I'm now going to do is just click the button inside of the application, and there we have it. We have the Cool Tools message box being displayed inside of the application. So that's all there is to it. Configure the OS image using Platform Builder. Make sure you have the right components inside of the operating system image. So that includes either support for the Compact Framework using the Compact Framework dependencies, or the Compact Framework itself, which would automatically include the OS dependencies for the Compact Framework. Also make sure that you have ipconfig. I use the HTTPD web server sometimes to make sure that I've got a connection to that target device, and also make sure that you've got the conman components, Command Client 2 and CMaccept in the operating system image. Build, deploy, boot the operating system image, and then use ipconfig to capture the IP address of the target operating system image. Then, at that point, you can move to Visual Studio 2005, generate your managed application. Don't forget we're using a CE5 target, but that's fine to target a CE6 operating system image. You can build your application, but don't deploy it until you've used tools, options, and devices to configure the IP address of the target that you want to attach to. And before you deploy your application from Visual Studio, make sure that you run Command Client 2 and CMaccept on top of your operating system image. You then have 3 minutes to make your connection and deploy your application from the application development runtime environment. So that's it. It's as simple as that. Configure, build, deploy, write your application. Thanks for watching.